So then we are back with the more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the holy cities of the Hamashiach laid waste from many centuries. Reading from Yeshayahu the prophet, it's always important understanding why the Hamashiach ben Yosef spoke in such a way that gave the proper understanding of the prophets and what the prophets prophesied regarding the completion of the spring feast, the restoration, and also the autumn feast. Now then, during these days where so many nations they have gone astray on their own, and obviously the administrations of the world have not resolved the problems of the world. In fact, the prophecy itself explains very precisely in the 23rd chapter of Yeshayahu. The nations are going to be ashamed for what they have done these last 1,000 years. They have lied, they have stolen, they have cheated, and they have not worked on behalf of the nation. Now, there are some tremendous forces involved with those kinds of categories of government. However, these powerful forces should not take the place of what then Yod-He Vav-He or God has mentioned on His Word. But nations have unfortunately scoundrelized themselves. They have become richer, and unfortunately the economy is ruined. Now then, understandably, the world always tries to come up with ideas to get their situation taken care of on its very own. Such as when the Yod-He Vav-He, Jireh, was speaking with his people, mostly his prophets, and he said, you try to build your own cisterns so would not become dependent on rains. So the nations have tried so desperately to make sure the system works that unfortunately, truly it's not. In fact, our country has such incompetent group of people doing politics. There's such a lack of industrious spirit that's lacking so enormously in our country. Not because there is a lack of money or raw materials, but it's because simply the nation is not upgrading itself with the new technological era of the kingdom of the East. So then, very sadly, we watch our country with such a great, huge potential walking backwards into the future. And there are many kinds of situations regarding this topic, because as the government is unable of making proper decisions regarding the very trade of the time of the end, but they compare themselves as being equal in expecting a miracle from heaven that would equalize the western side of the world in its trade and the eastern side of the world in its trade. Absolutely ridiculous understanding, because the scripture is extremely clear that the kingdom of the East in its trade is going to get absolute priority around the world. But because, unfortunately, our country has believed in a scripture that was translated was not the original manuscripts, and they have done this for so long, and the people have become complacent of what the prophets have said regarding the time of the restoration period. And now we find ourselves in the midst of a country absolutely with no direction as far as trade. We find skirmishes in many situations. We find people becoming richer and richer in these government levels, and they are not truly interested in trying to improve our economy. So, a person can safely say that regarding the future of our country, based from what this country is doing and improving in its flexible network system, thus far the future of the children of this country is ruined. So then, what are the problems that the world is facing, and it requires so much networking in servers and computerized systems that would make sure when China launches its final system, and then the nations should be prepared for it, but unfortunately most of them are not. So as this government is understanding, it's not only through force that a country can improve its economy, but through many other new technologies, and most importantly, the upgrading section of the trade of the time of the end via the internet. Taxation is a must. Can't get around it, because the scripture is very clear regarding the situation and the freighters of the earth. Many times this situation was repeated and repeated and repeated. So then when we hear the words of revelation, directly understandings and directions from the prophets, stating very precisely that there is a system coming from the east, and this system is very powerful, and the nations should line themselves with it. Now then, those nations that are far behind, they won't have much time for organizing other than simply downloading the existing system of China and having then the government dependent upon their entire data system. Comes a problem with it, because then the far away a nation is from the Chinese system in its flexible network, the harder it gets to get the proper percentage of taxes. Because countries and nations, they won't have time to organize what then each country or each state should receive from a particular system. This truly is a problem, because as the governments are so dependent upon the central bank and its printing machine, and this printing machine festival that's going on for so long has made them blind of what's going on the other side of the world. As if these politicians simply thinking that it's going to come up some sort of a fence around the country and some sort of a God is going to take care of it. So then, from the Hebrew perspective, because the prophets did not regard any kind of either king or any other authority, as Yod-Heh Vav-Heh Galah revealed the information, so the prophets spoke. And it's coming a time for the restoration not only of the tabernacle, but the restoration of trade and the restoration of military proper organization. There are many kinds of situations that are taking place before our very eyes based from the holy instructions and also Galah. And based from this understanding, we're going to have more and more of the data that we are watching on television being absolutely sifted through a flexible network, and these are already taking place, yet the government is far behind. As we want to watch more of this flexible network, the very least the government would be able to get from the system, because they don't even know how much they should charge for taxes. And this is what makes then the nation vulnerable as far as what the market is bringing on the internet, and what kind of a taxation the freighters will let the government charge, because the government is not having any of the system prepared for this flexibility of the market. Later on, I'm going to talk more of these enlightenment of Revelation, so please stay tuned, much more coming up.